Have you ever gone to bed at night with that quiet, uncomfortable thought, another day passed, and I'm still in the same place? Not because you're lazy, not because you don't have dreams, but because somehow, every attempt to change your life starts strong, and then slowly disappears. You promise yourself you'll wake up earlier. You promise you'll finally build that habit. You promise that tomorrow will be different, but tomorrow keeps arriving, and nothing really changes. Now here's the strange part most people never realize. The difference between a life that stays stuck and a life that completely transforms often begins with something unbelievably small. Not motivation, not talent, not luck, just one promise. In this story, you'll see how one man, someone who felt completely stuck, broke, and out of direction, rebuilt his entire future using a rule so simple most people ignore it. A rule that quietly turns discipline into power. And by the end of this video, you might realize something surprising. The same rule that changed his life could start changing yours today. Most people don't wake up wanting an ordinary life. They wake up with quiet hopes tucked somewhere inside them. Maybe today will be different. Maybe today something will change. But by the time the night arrives, the same strange feeling returns. Another day passed, and somehow nothing really moved forward. Morning alarms ring across the world like tiny starting guns. People open their eyes already carrying invisible pressure. Bills waiting, responsibilities stacking, dreams quietly postponed. Coffee is poured, phones are checked, routines begin automatically. And before the day even starts, many already feel behind. It's not always dramatic failure that breaks people. Sometimes it's something far quieter and far more dangerous. A slow drip of postponed goals and unfinished intentions. "I'll start tomorrow," they whisper, hoping tomorrow will save them. But tomorrow keeps moving further away, like a mirage in the desert. You see it everywhere if you look closely enough. The notebook filled with plans that were never followed. The gym membership that felt exciting for exactly 12 days. The book someone promised themselves they would finally finish. Little dreams quietly gathering dust in forgotten corners of life. At first, the mind offers comforting explanations. "I'm just tired right now. Things will calm down next week. I just need the right moment." But weeks become months, and months slowly become years. What hurts the most isn't laziness. It's the quiet doubt that grows. A small voice begins whispering dangerous questions. Maybe real change only happens to other people. Maybe some lives are meant to move forward, and others just stall. That voice doesn't shout. It patiently waits and repeats. And so days begin to look strangely identical. Wake up, work, scroll, postpone, sleep, repeat. Not terrible days, but not meaningful ones either. Just enough comfort to survive, but not enough courage to transform. Like standing on a moving sidewalk that never leads anywhere new. Somewhere out there tonight, someone is lying awake thinking about this. They're staring at the ceiling, wondering how life became so stuck. They know they're capable of more. They can feel it, but something invisible keeps pulling them back each time they try. And the truth is, one man is about to confront that exact feeling. Somewhere in a quiet apartment, long before sunrise, a man wakes up. Not because he's excited for the day ahead, but because sleep refuses to stay. His ceiling has become a familiar companion over the years. It's where late-night thoughts gather, where regrets replay themselves. And lately, those thoughts have been getting louder. From the outside, his life doesn't look like a disaster. He has a job, a place to live, and people who occasionally check in. But if you watched closely, you'd notice something missing. A certain spark that once lived behind his eyes. These days it flickers, and sometimes disappears entirely. There was a time when he believed his future would be different. He used to talk about plans with a kind of contagious excitement. Ideas about businesses, goals, travels, possibilities. Friends would nod and say, "You're going to do big things." Back then, he believed it too. But life has a quiet way of wearing people down. A few financial mistakes here, a missed opportunity there. Promises made to himself that slowly fell apart. One unfinished goal after another, stacking like silent evidence. Until confidence began slipping through his fingers. Now his days feel strangely mechanical. Alarm rings, coffee brews, work begins. Hours pass in front of screens and responsibilities. Nothing catastrophic happens, and yet nothing truly improves. Just movement without direction. Sometimes he scrolls through stories of successful people. You know the kind, the ones who turned everything around. For a moment, he feels a spark of possibility. Then the old thought returns like an unwanted guest. Yeah, but people like me don't pull that off. It's not that he's lazy, far from it. He's tried to change before, many times. New routines, ambitious plans, bursts of motivation. Each one starting strong and quietly collapsing weeks later. Every failed attempt carving deeper doubt inside him. And yet, somewhere deep beneath the disappointment, something remains. A stubborn, quiet awareness he can't fully silence. A feeling that his story isn't finished yet. That maybe, just maybe, the life he imagined isn't gone. But before anything changes, he must confront the hardest part of all. The strange thing about feeling stuck is that life doesn't actually stop. The clock keeps ticking, the sun keeps rising, the world keeps moving. But inside his own routine, everything feels frozen in place, like he's walking on a treadmill while everyone else moves forward. And the harder he thinks about it, the heavier the feeling becomes. His mornings begin with the same quiet negotiation. Today will be different, he tells himself while pouring coffee. Maybe today he'll start that habit he promised himself. Maybe today he'll take the first real step forward. But by noon, the energy that carried that promise begins fading. Work passes in a blur of small responsibilities and familiar screens. Nothing terrible happens, but nothing meaningful either. Hours slip away, almost invisibly, like sand through open fingers. He tells himself he'll focus tomorrow, when things are calmer. Yet tomorrow seems to arrive carrying the exact same distractions. Evenings are where the doubts grow louder. That's when the mind finally slows down enough to think. He sits with his phone glowing softly in the dim room, scrolling through other people's achievements, milestones, progress, and each image quietly whispers the same uncomfortable question. What happened to your plans? He remembers the promises he once made to himself, the goals written in notebooks that now sit untouched, the excitement he once felt imagining a different future. Now those memories feel almost like scenes from someone else's life, like watching an old version of himself from a distance. Sometimes he tries again. A burst of motivation hits out of nowhere. He makes a new plan, downloads an app, sets ambitious goals. For a few days, he feels unstoppable. Then slowly, almost invisibly, the momentum disappears. And when it does, the worst feeling returns. Not failure, but disappointment in himself. Because deep down, he knows the pattern too well now. Start strong, lose consistency, watch everything collapse again. The cycle repeats until belief itself begins to crack. But life has a way of forcing honesty eventually. There comes a moment when excuses stop working. A moment when drifting quietly is no longer possible. For this man, that moment is approaching faster than he realizes. And when it arrives, it will change everything. Change rarely begins with comfort. More often, it starts with a moment that feels almost unbearable. A moment when reality steps in and removes every excuse. For this man, that moment arrived on an ordinary evening. The kind of evening that looked normal, until it wasn't. It started with something small. A message, an email, a quiet rejection. The kind people rarely talk about. Another opportunity slipping through his fingers. Another reminder that time had been moving while he stood still. And this time, the usual explanations didn't feel convincing anymore. He sat there staring at the screen longer than necessary. The room was silent except for the faint hum of electricity. No dramatic music, no audience, no one watching. Just a man alone with a truth he had been avoiding. His life had been drifting, and drifting has consequences. For a long moment, he tried to blame circumstances. Bad timing, bad luck, the economy, other people. All the usual stories people tell themselves to soften the blow. But something inside him refused to accept that narrative tonight. For the first time in a long time, he looked at the situation honestly, and honesty can be brutal. He thought about the years that had quietly passed, the habits he promised to build but never protected, the discipline he admired in others but never practiced himself, the dreams he postponed while waiting for motivation to appear. And suddenly the pattern became impossible to ignore. His biggest problem wasn't failure, it was inconsistency. Not a lack of intelligence, not a lack of opportunity, but the quiet habit of breaking promises to himself. Little promises that seemed harmless until they added up. That realization hit him harder than the rejection itself, because if he had created this pattern, it meant something else too. It meant the situation wasn't random. It meant his future might still be shaped by his choices, but only if he was willing to face one uncomfortable truth. The life he wanted would never appear by accident. Something inside him would have to change first. Not next month, not next year, now. And the next decision he makes will quietly begin that shift. That night didn't end with fireworks or dramatic declarations. No grand speech, no sudden surge of unstoppable motivation. Just a man sitting quietly in a dim room, thinking differently than before. For once, he stopped searching for a massive life overhaul. Instead, a simpler thought slowly began forming. What if the problem wasn't effort, but scale? For years, every attempt at change had followed the same pattern. Huge plans, strict schedules, ambitious transformations overnight. Wake up at 5 a.m., work out daily, read 10 books a month. It sounded powerful in theory, but reality always pushed back harder than expected. The problem with dramatic change is that it burns like fireworks, bright, exciting, and gone within days. Motivation carries the first few steps, but discipline must carry the rest. And discipline, he realized, doesn't appear through intensity. It grows through something far smaller, a promise, not a big one, not the kind that demands perfection, just one promise small enough that excuses lose their power, a promise so simple that breaking it would feel almost ridiculous, and yet powerful enough to prove something important, that he could trust himself again. He leaned back in his chair, thinking through the idea. What if instead of trying to rebuild his entire life overnight, he rebuilt one brick at a time? One daily action that must happen no matter what. Rain, exhaustion, bad mood, busy schedule. It wouldn't matter. For someone watching from the outside, it might look insignificant. 5 pages read, 10 minutes of focused work on a goal, a short workout, a journal entry, one meaningful improvement, small enough to be impossible to avoid. But something about that idea felt different, because every time he completed it, a quiet message would echo inside him. I keep my promises. Day after day, that message would get stronger, and if that belief returned, everything else might follow. Still, an idea alone isn't enough to reshape a life. Soon, he would discover a principle that would change how he saw discipline forever. Many of the stories you hear here aren't just stories. They reflect the invisible weight you may be carrying every day. If you're tired of holding pain, responsibility, and guilt that were never yours, I created an ebook called The Weight of Stones That Are Not Yours and More Too bonus for you. It's for those who want to let go, set boundaries, and live with more lightness. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. A few days after that quiet decision, something unexpected happened. Not a dramatic event, just a simple encounter that most people would ignore. Sometimes wisdom arrives in loud, life-changing moments. Other times, it appears quietly through a sentence that lands at exactly the right time. For him, it came through words he almost overlooked. It happened while he was reading late one evening. Not a thick self-help book or some complicated philosophy. Just a short passage he stumbled across almost by accident. But one sentence stopped him in the middle of the page, and suddenly, everything felt different. The sentence said something surprisingly simple. Discipline is not about intensity. It's about consistency. It's not about what you do once in a burst of motivation. It's about what you do repeatedly, even when you don't feel like it. At first, the idea sounded obvious, almost too obvious to matter. But the more he thought about it, the more uncomfortable it became. Because it explained every failed attempt he'd ever made. He had always chased intensity instead of consistency. He would attack new goals with excitement and energy. Long workouts, long study sessions, ambitious plans. For a few days, sometimes a week, he felt unstoppable. But intensity demands emotional fuel, and eventually that fuel always runs out. Consistency works differently. Consistency doesn't care about mood. It doesn't depend on inspiration. It simply asks one quiet question each day. Did you keep the promise you made to yourself today? Nothing more, nothing less. The realization hit him with unusual clarity. All those years he thought discipline meant pushing harder. In reality, discipline meant showing up when pushing felt impossible. Not once, not twice, but daily, even when the action seemed small or unimpressive. And suddenly, the idea he had days earlier started making more sense. Maybe the power wasn't in doing something big. Maybe it was in doing something small that never stopped. Something repeatable, something non-negotiable. Now he just needed a system simple enough to survive real life. The idea stayed with him for days. It followed him during quiet walks, during work breaks, even during late nights. If consistency was the real engine of discipline, then the solution couldn't be complicated. Complicated systems collapse the moment life gets busy. What he needed was something simpler, something unbreakable. So one evening, he sat down with a notebook and wrote a single question. What is the smallest action that moves my life forward? Not the fastest action, not the most impressive one, just the smallest step that would still count as progress. A step so simple it could survive even the worst days. After thinking about it for a while, he circled one idea, one daily act of discipline, just one thing that had to happen every single day. No negotiation, no postponing, no excuses hiding behind tomorrow. A rule so small it felt almost humble. But that was the point. If he chose something massive, the pattern would repeat. Energy would rise, enthusiasm would explode, and collapse soon after. But if the action was small enough, something interesting would happen. The mind would stop resisting, and consistency could quietly take root. For some people, that daily act might be 10 minutes of learning. For others, it might be writing one paragraph toward a goal, maybe reading 5 pages of a book every morning, maybe walking for 15 minutes instead of sitting still. The power wasn't in the size, it was in the repetition. He wrote his rule clearly at the top of the page. One promise, every day. No exceptions. Then he added another line beneath it. Even on bad days, do the minimum, because bad days are where most habits die. And this time, he refused to let that happen again. The next morning would become the true beginning, not because the action would be extraordinary, but because for the first time, he would measure success differently, not by how much he achieved, but by whether he kept the promise. The first morning arrived quietly. No dramatic music, no surge of inspiration, just a normal day beginning like any other. But this time, something was different inside him. Today, a promise had to be kept. At first, the action felt almost too small. Part of his mind even tried to dismiss it. That's it. This tiny step won't change anything. The ego loves dramatic victories, not humble beginnings. But he had already made peace with that. So he did the action anyway. It didn't take long. No applause, no transformation, no instant success. Just a simple check mark in his notebook. And strangely, that small check mark felt heavier than expected, because it represented something he hadn't felt in a long time: integrity with himself. The next day wasn't quite as smooth. Motivation had already faded a little. The alarm sounded harsher than before. Excuses began lining up quietly in his mind. You can skip today. It's not a big deal. But that thought was exactly the trap he had lived in for years. Skipping once seems harmless. Then skipping becomes easier the second time. Soon the habit dissolves completely. He had watched this pattern destroy dozens of attempts before, and this time, he recognized the danger immediately. So he did the minimum. Not a perfect effort, not an impressive performance, just the smallest version of the promise. Enough to keep the chain unbroken, enough to prove something important to himself. The third day came with resistance again, then the fourth, then the fifth. Old habits don't surrender quietly. They fight back with comfort, distraction, and fatigue. And every day started to feel like a quiet test. But something subtle was happening beneath the struggle. Each time he kept the promise, a new belief was forming. Small at first, almost invisible. A quiet thought that hadn't visited his mind in years. Maybe, just maybe, this time things would be different. At first, nothing remarkable happened. No dramatic breakthrough, no sudden wave of success. Just one quiet action repeated day after day. From the outside, his life looked almost exactly the same, but something subtle had started shifting beneath the surface. Days slowly turned into weeks. The promise remained small, but the consistency grew stronger. Each checkmark in the notebook began forming a quiet chain, a chain he didn't want to break anymore. And protecting that chain became strangely important. What surprised him most was how the mind began to change. That old voice of doubt still appeared occasionally, but now it had competition. Another voice had started whispering something new. You kept the promise yesterday. You can keep it today. That small shift began affecting other parts of his life. He noticed himself procrastinating a little less. He started organizing small things he used to ignore. His attention felt sharper, his focus steadier. Tiny improvements stacking quietly on top of each other. It wasn't dramatic progress. In fact, some days still felt painfully ordinary. But ordinary consistency has a hidden power. it slowly rebuilds something most people lose without noticing: trust in their own word. The man who once broke promises easily was changing, not overnight, not with explosive motivation, but through repetition so steady it became part of his identity. Each day he completed the act. A message echoed inside him: I'm the kind of person who shows up. That belief began spreading like roots underground. Soon he started adding small improvements around the habit. A few extra minutes of effort here, a little more focus there. Growth expanding naturally instead of being forced. And then one day, something unexpected happened. Not a miracle, not a life-changing jackpot, but a moment that proved the change was real. A moment that quietly showed him something powerful. His discipline was starting to reshape his future. It didn't happen on a special day. No celebration, no countdown, no warning. Just an ordinary afternoon that quietly carried something new. The kind of moment people often miss if they're not paying attention. But this time he noticed. It started with a small opportunity. Nothing life-changing at first glance. A project at work, a conversation, a chance to step forward. Months earlier he probably would have hesitated. Back then, doubt would have spoken louder than courage. But something inside him had changed. The man who showed up every day for his promise was different now. Not louder, not more dramatic, just steadier. His thoughts felt clearer. His actions felt more deliberate. And when the opportunity appeared, he didn't shrink from it. He stepped forward. That step may have looked small to everyone else, but to him, it felt enormous. Because it wasn't powered by excitement or pressure. It was powered by the quiet confidence he had been rebuilding. The kind confidence grows when promises are kept. The result came soon after. A bit of recognition, a little more trust from others. Someone noticed the consistency in his work. Someone saw reliability where chaos used to live, and suddenly, doors that once felt closed didn't seem so locked. But the most important change wasn't external, it was internal. For the first time in years, he saw proof that effort compounds, that small daily actions eventually echo in the real world. That discipline isn't just about habits, it shapes identity, and that realization planted a powerful new belief inside him. If one small promise could create this much change, what would happen if he kept going? Months passed, and the small promise was still there, quiet, steady, almost invisible to the outside world. But inside his life, it had begun to reshape everything. Not through sudden miracles or overnight success, through something far more powerful: accumulated change. The man who once struggled to start his days now moved differently. His mornings had a sense of direction. Not perfect mornings, not heroic ones. Just mornings guided by a simple rule he refused to break. And that rule was slowly changing how he saw himself. Identity is a strange thing. At first, he thought he was forcing discipline into his life. But over time, something unexpected happened. Discipline stopped feeling like effort. It started feeling like part of who he was becoming, like a muscle that had finally awakened. His work began improving almost naturally. Focus came easier when the mind trusted itself again. Deadlines were no longer enemies. Responsibilities no longer felt overwhelming. Consistency had quietly replaced chaos. People around him started noticing the difference. Friends commented on his energy. Colleagues noticed his reliability. Even small conversations carried a new tone of confidence. Not arrogance, just quiet stability. But the biggest transformation was internal. The man who once doubted every new attempt was gone. In his place stood someone who understood a deeper truth. Progress doesn't come from perfect motivation. It comes from daily proof that you keep your word, and that proof changes everything. The small promise he made months earlier had grown roots. It spread into his routines, his decisions, his ambitions. Now bigger goals no longer felt intimidating, because he had learned the secret behind real growth. Big changes are simply small promises repeated long enough. And yet, the most important part of the story isn't about him, it's about you. Because the same invisible force that rebuilt his life is available to anyone willing to start small. But before that realization fully lands, there's one final truth to understand. A truth that could quietly reshape someone's entire future. Stories like this often sound extraordinary at first. A man changes his life, rebuilds his confidence, finds direction again. But when you look closely, the transformation didn't begin with luck. It didn't start with perfect timing or sudden inspiration. It started with something far smaller. A promise. Not a promise to the world. Not a promise announced to friends or posted online. Just a quiet commitment made in an empty room. A commitment that said, "From now on, I keep my word." And that decision slowly rewrote the story of his life. Most people think change requires massive effort. They imagine heroic mornings and unstoppable motivation. But real transformation rarely works like that. It grows quietly through actions that feel almost insignificant. Actions repeated long enough to reshape who you believe you are. Think about it for a moment. What would happen if you made one promise today? Not 10 promises, not a complicated life plan. Just one action that moves your life slightly forward. Small enough to complete even on your worst day, but meaningful enough to build momentum. Maybe it's reading 5 pages every morning. Maybe it's writing a single paragraph toward a dream. Maybe it's 10 minutes learning a skill that could change your future. Maybe it's walking when you'd normally stay still. Simple actions that quietly rebuild trust in yourself, because that trust is where everything begins. When you start keeping promises to yourself, something shifts inside. Confidence stops depending on external results. Discipline stops feeling like punishment, and suddenly progress becomes something you create daily, not something you wait for. And that's the hidden truth most people never discover. Your future doesn't change the day you feel motivated. It changes the day you decide your word matters. The day a small promise becomes non-negotiable. The day consistency becomes part of your identity. And the question now becomes impossible to ignore. What promise will you start keeping today?